The darkness above Jar 7 wasn't like the darkness of space. It consumed light, rather than merely existing without it. Standing at the viewport of Research Outpost Kappa 9, Dr. Mara Kalin watched as another tendril of what the technicians called void matter curled from the nearby abyss. It twisted upward like smoke before dissolving into the rusty atmosphere. The locals, before Corinth had eliminated them, had called this place the mouth that hungers. Science had given it a more sterile name, spatial anomaly, ZR379. But Mara knew better. Names couldn't capture what dwelled within. She pressed her palm against the reinforced glass. The desert planet stretched before her, its crimson dunes rippling under twin moons. In the distance, the anomaly pulsed, a wound in reality that neither swallowed light like a black hole, nor emitted it like a star. It simply waited. "Dr. Kalin, your presence is required in Laboratory 7. The automated announcement startled her from her trance. "Repeat, Dr. Kalin to Laboratory 7. Mara sighed, pushing back a strand of copper hair that had escaped her tight bun. At 36, she had become the youngest xenobiologist to lead a Corinth Imperial expedition. The honor felt hollow now, 6 months into their assignment on this forsaken world. The corridor to Laboratory 7 was deliberately long, designed to provide adequate time for decontamination procedures. Mara passed through 3 airlock systems, each bathing her in different frequencies of radiation to eliminate potential cross-contamination. By the time she reached the lab's entrance, her skin tingled with familiar discomfort. Colonel Wren stood with his back to her, his imposing frame silhouetted against the observation window. Beyond the glass lay their subject, their only remaining subject. "You're late, Doctor," Wren said without turning. "I was observing the anomaly. There's been increased activity in the past 27 hours. Wren grunted. "Your priority should be here. The Emperor expects results, not astronomical observations." Mara moved beside him, looking through the glass. The Trallian prisoner sat huddled in the corner of the sterile white room. His azure skin had paled to a sickly lavender during captivity, and the characteristic ridge along his spine had begun to flake. Unlike humans, Trallians were born with an exoskeleton that hardened throughout adolescence. This one, they'd never bothered learning his name, appeared young, perhaps the equivalent of 20 Earth years. "Subject T7 is our last viable candidate," Wren continued. "The others have proven insufficient." Mara fought to keep her expression neutral. Insufficient meant dead. 17 test subjects, political prisoners, captured rebels, and war criminals from across the Corinth Empire had perished in their experiments. Their deaths had been neither quick nor merciful. "The Emperor's Council has approved the final phase," Wren said, turning to face her. His cybernetic eye whirred softly as it adjusted focus. "Tomorrow, we proceed with live interaction." The word struck Mara like a physical blow. "Live interaction? Colonel, we've barely understood the preliminary data. The creature's feeding patterns are inconsistent, and we still don't know." "What we know," Wren interrupted, "is that conventional weapons are useless against it. What we know is that it consumes biological matter with unprecedented efficiency. What we know, Dr. Kalin, is that similar anomalies have been detected in 3 other systems under Imperial protection." Mara fell silent. The implications were clear. Corinth feared these entities, and what Corinth feared, it sought to control or destroy. "The schedule has been accelerated," Wren continued. "We will place T7 at the anomaly's perimeter tomorrow at 600 hours. Your team will monitor and record all interactions. If the entity responds as hypothesized, we proceed to Phase 2. "And what exactly is Phase 2? Wren's organic eye narrowed. "That information is classified even from you. Doctor, for now, focus on preparations for tomorrow. I want full biometric monitoring, quantum entanglement recorders, and psychic imprint scanners. Psychic imprint, Mara frowned. Our previous tests showed no telepathic activity. Not from the entity. Perhaps. But our last 3 subjects exhibited unusual neural patterns in their final moments. Ren handed her a datapad. Review these readings. Something happens to consciousness when the entity feeds. I want to know what. After Ren departed, Mara remained in the observation room, watching the Tralian prisoner. Unlike the others, he hadn't been violent or particularly dangerous. His crime was simply being on the wrong side of the Tralian-Corinth conflict, a junior communications officer captured during the Battle of Proxima Centauri. She activated the intercom. "Hello? Can you understand me?" The Tralian lifted his head slowly. His large, pupilless eyes blinked at the ceiling, searching for the source of her voice. "Yes," he replied in halting standard. "I understand." How are you feeling today?" He gave a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "Like prisoner waiting to die. How else to feel?" Mara winced. "I'm sorry. I wish there was another way." "There is." The Tralian stood, approaching the glass that separated them. Though she knew he couldn't see her through the one-way barrier, his gaze seemed to find her eyes. "Let me go. Or kill me quickly. Not what you do to others." A chill ran through her. "What do you mean? What do you know about the others?" "I hear their screams." He pressed a 6-fingered hand against the glass. "Even through walls. Not normal screams. Like souls being torn apart." Mara switched off the intercom, her hand trembling. She accessed the datapad Ren had given her, scrolling through the neural scans of previous subjects. The patterns were unlike anything she'd seen before, brain activity increasing exponentially in the moments before death, particularly in regions associated with pain processing and memory. One file caught her attention. A partial recording from Subject T3, another Tralian. The audio began with standard vital monitoring, then devolved into screams. But beneath the screams was something else, a harmonics pattern that didn't match any known vocalizations. Mara enhanced the frequency, isolating it from the subject's cries. What she heard turned her blood to ice. It wasn't just one voice screaming. It was thousands, layered atop each other, stretching back through what sounded like centuries. And they weren't just expressions of pain. They were begging, pleading. Thousands of conscious entities trapped in a state of perpetual agony. Mara stumbled back from the console, her stomach heaving. The Planet Eater didn't just consume physical matter. It consumed consciousness itself, and somehow kept its victims aware throughout eternity. What Corinth planned wasn't an experiment. It was a sacrifice. She looked up at the Tralian prisoner, still standing at the glass, unaware of the horrors that awaited him. In that moment, Mara made her decision. She couldn't be complicit in this atrocity. Not anymore. Her hands shook as she entered her access code into a secure terminal. She had 8 hours until the morning shift arrived. 8 hours to save a life, and perhaps her soul. The desert night of Jar 7 was deceivingly beautiful. Crystalline formations scattered across the dunes caught the moonlight, creating an ocean of glittering stars beneath a sky filled with real ones. In another context, Mara might have found it breathtaking. Now, it was merely the backdrop to her desperate flight. "We must move faster," she whispered to the Tralian, who stumbled behind her. His name, she had learned, was Call. After 6 months of captivity and experimentation, his once athletic frame had withered. "The ridge ahead will shield us from the outpost's sensors." Where are we going?" Call gasped. His breathing labored in the thin atmosphere. Mara hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth, that she had no real plan beyond getting him away from the laboratory. "There's an emergency shuttle bay at Outpost Omega 3, about 7 kilometers east. If we can reach it before dawn." She let the implication hang between them, They both knew escape from the planet was nearly impossible. The Corinth Empire didn't tolerate desertion, and every vessel was equipped with bioscanners keyed to authorized personnel. As they crested the ridge, the anomaly came into view. From this distance, it resembled a vast pit in the desert floor, but its edges shimmered with unnatural energy. Occasional bursts of darkness, darker than the night around them, erupted from its center, briefly illuminating the landscape with anti-light. Cal froze. "The Devourer," he whispered, using the Trallian term for the entity. "You're taking me to it." "No," Mara grabbed his arm. "We're going around it. The shuttle bay is beyond, but we need to stay at least 2 kilometers from the perimeter." "You lie," Cal hissed, yanking his arm free. "You're like the others, using me as food for it." "I'm trying to save you," Mara insisted, her voice cracking. "If we stay at the outpost, they'll throw you into that thing tomorrow at dawn. I've seen what happens to the subjects. I've heard." She stopped herself, unwilling to describe the recordings. Cal studied her face in the moonlight. "You have heard the voices," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Mara nodded. "How did you know?" "My people have encountered the Devourers before. Not here, but in the Cygnus Expanse. There are stories passed down through generations, warnings about holes in reality that consume more than flesh." He turned to face the anomaly. "The old texts say they feed on suffering itself." A shiver ran down Mara's spine. "The neural patterns we recorded, they showed massive stimulation in pain centers. But more than that, the consciousness seemed to multiply somehow, as if it was being copied over and over." "Yes," Cal said grimly. "The Devourer doesn't just take life. It takes the moment of greatest agony and preserves it, experiencing it eternally. One death becomes infinite deaths." Mara felt sick. The Empire had known, or at least suspected, this truth. Why else would they be so interested in the psychic imprints Wren had mentioned? A distant whine broke the night stillness. Mara recognized it immediately. Atmospheric patrol drones. "They've discovered we're missing." She grabbed Cal's hand. "We need to find shelter." The only cover nearby was a cluster of rock formations, too exposed for a thorough search, but perhaps enough to hide from aerial surveillance. They scrambled down the ridge toward the jagged stones, loose sand sliding beneath their feet. As they reached the rocks, Mara's communicator chirped, an emergency broadcast to all personnel. "Attention all Outpost Kappa 9 staff. This is Colonel Wren. Research subject T7 has escaped custody with the assistance of Dr. Mara Kalin. Both are to be considered dangerous and unstable. Mara Kalin has accessed classified files and may be compromised. Authorization granted for lethal force if necessary. Repeat, lethal force authorized." Mara switched off the communicator, her hands shaking. There was no going back now. They huddled in the shadow of the largest rock formation, watching as drone searchlights swept the desert landscape. Each passing minute brought dawn closer, and with it, the certainty of discovery. "We can't stay here," Mara whispered. "And we can't outrun them across open terrain." "What about that?" Cal pointed toward a dark recess in the rock face, the entrance to what appeared to be a small cave. Mara hesitated. Cave systems on Jar 7 were notoriously unstable, often leading to sudden sinkholes or underground gas pockets. But with patrol drones circling overhead, they had few options. "Stay close to me," she said, activating the light function on her wrist device. "And be ready to run back out if I say so." The cave entrance was narrow, requiring them to squeeze through sideways. Inside, the space widened into a roughly circular chamber about 4 meters in diameter. The walls glittered with embedded mineral deposits, casting eerie reflections from Mara's light. "This isn't natural," she murmured, examining the too perfect curvature of the walls. "This was made by something." Cal ran his 6-fingered hand along the smooth surface. The indigenous species? The ones your empire eliminated? Mara nodded grimly. Before Corinth had established research outposts on Jar 7, the planet had been home to a primitive but fascinating civilization. Official records claimed they had succumbed to a naturally occurring plague. But Mara had seen enough classified documents to know the truth. Systematic extermination to secure unrestricted access to the anomaly. "Look at these," Kahl said, pointing to a series of shallow indentations in the wall. They formed patterns, not quite writing, but clearly intentional. They're warnings. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because my people use similar markers near the Cygnus Devourer." He traced the symbols with his fingers. "This one means death. This one represents eternity. And this." He paused at a complex pattern of interlocking curves. "This represents the fragmentation of consciousness." Before Mara could respond, her light caught something at the rear of the chamber, a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the rock. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from within. "There's something down there," she whispered. The tunnel descended at a steep angle, requiring them to brace against the walls to avoid sliding uncontrollably. The phosphorescence grew stronger as they progressed, eventually revealing its source. A vast underground cavern illuminated by colonies of bioluminescent fungi that clung to the ceiling like stars. But it was what occupied the center of the cavern that stole Mara's breath. A structure of impossible geometry rose from the stone floor, a spiraling tower of what appeared to be black glass, its surface etched with the same symbols they had seen above. At its base lay scattered remnants of the native civilization, tools, ceremonial objects, and what might have been scientific instruments, though unlike any Mara had encountered. They were studying it too, she realized aloud. The indigenous people, they were researching the anomaly, just like us. "Not like you," Cal corrected quietly. "They were trying to contain it, not exploit it." He approached the tower cautiously, examining the artifacts scattered around it. Most had deteriorated beyond recognition, but one object remained intact, a spherical device about the size of a human skull, covered in intricate circuitry, unlike any known technology. "What is it?" Mara asked, joining him. "I don't know. But look." Kahl pointed to a series of diagrams etched into the stone floor. They depicted the sphere positioned at specific points, around what was clearly a representation of the anomaly. Lines of force connected them, forming a containment barrier. "It's a seal," Mara breathed. "They were trying to close the anomaly." A distant rumble shook dust from the cavern ceiling. The drones were using ground-penetrating sonar to search for them. "We don't have much time," Mara said. "If they find this place, then we must take this." Kahl carefully lifted the spherical device. "If it can truly seal the Devourer, we cannot let your empire have it. They would destroy it to maintain their access." Mara couldn't argue with his logic. Whatever Corinth wanted with the Planet Eater, it wasn't containment. The classified files she'd glimpsed suggested weaponization, a way to harness the entity's consciousness-consuming abilities against enemy worlds. "There must be more of these devices," she said, scanning the cavern. "The diagrams show multiple points of containment." They searched frantically among the ruins, eventually discovering 2 more spheres partially buried under collapsed sections of the tower. Both were damaged, but potentially salvageable. "3 isn't enough," Kahl said, studying the floor diagrams more carefully. "The seal requires 7 points to complete the circuit. Maybe the indigenous people took the others when they fled, or the Empire found them during the purge." Another, stronger tremor interrupted them. This one wasn't from drones. It came from deeper within the planet itself. The cavern floor cracked, a thin fissure running from the tower toward the tunnel entrance. "The anomaly," Mara gasped. "It's expanding!" As if in confirmation, a pulse of that familiar dark energy flowed through the fissure, momentarily extinguishing the bioluminescent fungi where it passed. When the light returned, The crack had widened. "We need to leave," Call urged, gathering the three spheres into a makeshift sling created from his prisoner garment. "Find somewhere to examine these properly." Mara hesitated, her scientific instincts battling with survival. "Wait, there might be documentation, research notes, anything that explains how these devices work." "There's no time!" Kal grabbed her arm as another, stronger pulse shook the cavern. "The Devourer senses us. It hungers." They scrambled back through the tunnel as the tremors intensified. By the time they reached the upper chamber, sections of the ceiling had begun to collapse. The narrow exit seemed miles away as they dodged falling debris. Mara reached the opening first, squeezing through into the pre-dawn air. She turned back to help Call, who struggled with the bulky spheres. Just as he pushed the final device through to her, a massive tremor shook the entire formation. Rock collapsed around him, pinning his lower body. "Call!" Mara screamed, reaching back through the narrowing opening. "Take my hand!" His face contorted with pain, but he shook his head. "Save the spheres. They're more important." "I'm not leaving you!" She wedged herself into the opening, straining to reach him as more rocks fell. With a final, desperate effort, Call pushed himself free and grabbed her outstretched hand. Mara pulled with all her strength, dragging him through the gap moments before it collapsed entirely. They lay gasping on the sand as the entire rock formation shuddered and sank several meters into the ground. Dawn had broken while they were underground, bathing the desert in harsh crimson light. "Are you hurt?" Mara asked, examining Call's legs. "Broken," he grimaced, pointing to his right leg where the exoskeleton had cracked, revealing soft tissue beneath. "But I can move with help." The horizon suddenly lit up with approaching vehicles. The outpost's security forces had expanded their search beyond drones. They had minutes at most before discovery. "We need shelter and time," Mara said, mind racing. "Time to understand these devices." Call pointed toward the eastern ridge. "There, the shuttle bay you mentioned. We'll never reach it before they catch us." "We don't need to reach it." Call's eyes held a desperate clarity. "We just need to reach the communications array beside it. Every outpost has one. Yes? For emergency transmissions?" Mara nodded slowly, understanding his plan. "You want to send a message? To whom?" The Trallian government wouldn't risk confronting Corinth. Not after their defeat. "Not to Tralia." Call struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on her. "To someone who might help us understand these devices. Someone who knows technology, but isn't loyal to Corinth." "You mean a smuggler, a criminal?" "I mean an engineer, the best one I know." Understanding dawned on Mara. "You know someone on this planet? Someone outside the Empire's control?" Call managed a pained smile. "How do you think I survived 6 months of your experiments, when others died within weeks? I had hope. My brother's mate, Jarek Voss, was stationed on the maintenance crew at Outpost Omega-3 before deserting 3 months ago. If anyone can help us understand these devices, it's him." Hope flickered in Mara's chest for the first time since discovering the truth about the Planet Eater. "Can you get a message to him?" "If I can access a communications array with enough power, yes. He monitors emergency frequencies." They set off toward the eastern ridge, Mara supporting Call's weight as he hobbled alongside her. The spherical devices clinked together in their makeshift sling, each impact sending shivers down Mara's spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that the objects were somehow alive, aware of their proximity to the anomaly that they had been designed to contain. Behind them, the desert trembled as the Planet Eater stirred in its abyss, sensing the movement of the only tools that might cage it once more. The acid storm hit without warning. One moment, the sky above Jar 7 was the familiar rusty hue of dawn. The next, it darkened to a sickly green as clouds materialized from the upper atmosphere. Mara had read about the planet's notorious weather patterns, but had never experienced them firsthand. The research outpost was equipped with atmospheric shields that neutralized the worst effects. "We need cover!" she shouted as the first drops began to fall. Each sizzled where it struck the sand, leaving tiny glass beads in its wake. Call pointed to a depression in the landscape ahead, the remnants of a dried riverbed. "There! The banks might provide some shelter." They half ran, half stumbled toward it as the rain intensified. Each droplet that struck exposed skin left an angry red welt. By the time they reached the riverbed and tucked themselves beneath its overhanging bank, both were gasping with pain. "The spheres," Mara said through gritted teeth. "Are they protected?" Call checked the makeshift sling, now pulled tight against his body. "They seem undamaged. The material of my garment is resistant to most corrosives. Standard Imperial prison issue." The irony wasn't lost on Mara. The same empire that had planned to sacrifice Call had unknowingly provided the means to protect their only hope of containing the anomaly. From their shelter, they watched the security vehicles in the distance change course, forced away from the storm's epicenter. It was a temporary reprieve at best. Once the storm passed, the search would intensify. "How much farther to the communications array?" Mara asked, applying a thin layer of emergency sealant from her utility belt to the worst of her acid burns. 3 kilometers. Perhaps 4. Call winced as she treated a particularly deep burn on his forearm. "But we cannot move until the storm passes." Mara nodded grimly. The acid rain of Jar 7 wasn't just corrosive to organic matter. It interfered with electronic systems as well, creating a natural electromagnetic pulse effect. Their pursuers would be equally hindered. She used the force delay to examine one of the spherical devices more closely. Its surface wasn't metal or glass, as she had initially thought, but some composite material that felt warm to the touch. Intricate patterns covered every centimeter, reminiscent of circuit designs, but following no logic she recognized. "Can you make anything of this?" she asked Call. He took the sphere, turning it carefully in his 6-fingered hands. "Some elements resemble Trallian quantum circuitry, but far more advanced. See these spiraling patterns? They're similar to what we use for consciousness transfer in medical procedures." "Consciousness transfer?" Mara frowned. "You mean like mind uploading?" "In a sense. When a Trallian suffers catastrophic physical trauma, their consciousness can sometimes be temporarily transferred to a compatible host until their body is repaired." He traced one of the patterns. "These circuits look like they're designed to capture and redirect consciousness, but on a much larger scale." The implications sent a chill through Mara. If the Planet Eater feeds on consciousness, then these devices might act as... what? Decoys, traps, or redirectors, Call suggested. "Perhaps they don't seal the anomaly so much as redirect what it attempts to consume." A sudden thought struck Mara. The neural patterns we recorded from previous subjects, they showed consciousness being multiplied, not just captured. What if that multiplication is part of how the entity feeds? It creates infinite copies of the consciousness at the moment of maximum pain. And these devices might interrupt that process. Call nodded slowly. Preventing the multiplication and starving the devourer. The acid rain began to slacken, the heavy downpour reducing to scattered drops. In the distance, the security vehicles remained stationary, likely waiting for systems to reboot after the electromagnetic interference. "We should move," Mara said, gathering their meager supplies. While they're still recovering, they emerged from their shelter into a transformed landscape. The acid rain had vitrified the surface of the desert, creating a glassy crust that crunched beneath their feet. It wouldn't last long. The intense heat would soon return the surface to sand. But for now, it made their progress both easier and more precarious. As they crested a low rise, the communications array came into view. Unlike the main outposts, the array was largely automated, requiring minimal personnel. A single control building sat beside the massive dish, with no signs of activity. "It looks deserted," Mara whispered, surveying the site through her field scanner. But there could be automated security systems. There are, Cal confirmed. Standard Imperial protocol includes motion sensors, heat detectors, and identity verification gates. Can you bypass them? Not directly, but Jarek taught me a few tricks. Cal pointed to a maintenance access point at the base of the dish support structure. That panel controls the auxiliary power systems. If we can trigger a localized outage, the security systems will default to manual override mode. Which helps us how? Mara asked skeptically. Manual override requires physical confirmation by authorized personnel. Cal managed a weak smile. And thanks to your help, we have one. Mara understood. Her biometric data would still register as authorized in the system, at least until Colonel Wren implemented a full security purge, which would take time given the disruption from the storm. They approached cautiously, using the glassy terrain to slide rather than walk when possible, minimizing detectable movement. When they reached the perimeter fence, Cal directed Mara to a specific junction box. Apply your palm print here. When the system asks for confirmation, enter the emergency reset code. How do you know about reset codes? Mara asked suspiciously. 6 months in captivity provides ample opportunity to observe protocols. Cal's expression darkened. Especially when you're regularly moved between facilities for experimentation. Guilt twisted in Mara's stomach. She placed her palm on the scanner, watching as it glowed green in recognition. The system prompted for a 6-digit code. Try 739285, Cal suggested. It's the standard prefix for Outpost Omega facilities. Mara entered the digits, and the scanner flashed acceptance. Moments later, the lights along the perimeter fence dimmed as the system cycled to auxiliary power. Now we have approximately 3 minutes before the main systems restart, Cal explained. We need to reach the communications console inside. They slipped through a maintenance gate that had disengaged during the power transition. The control building's entrance similarly stood unlocked, its automated security temporarily disabled. Inside, they found a standard Imperial communications suite, identical to the one at Outpost Kappa 9. Cal moved immediately to the primary console, his fingers flying over the interface with surprising dexterity. I need to send a burst transmission on a specific frequency. It won't take long, but it will be detectable. How long before someone responds? If Jarek is monitoring, seconds. If not, Cal shrugged. We'll need an alternative plan. Mara positioned herself by the window, watching for approaching vehicles. The security forces remained distant, but had begun moving again. Their time was running out. Transmission sent, Cal announced. Now we wait. The seconds stretched into an excruciating minute. Mara was about to suggest they retreat when the console chirped with an incoming message. Identify, came a terse voice over the speaker. Virka Zarek Tor, Cal responded in Tralian. Jarek, it's Cal. I've escaped, but I'm injured and pursued. I have a human ally and artifacts of great importance. A pause. Then, coordinates received. Stay where you are. 7 minutes. The transmission ended abruptly. Cal slumped in relief. He's coming! Mara checked the approaching security vehicles again. They'll reach us before then. We need to disable their transportation somehow. Her gaze fell on the communications array outside. The dish. If we redirect it to broadcast at ground level with maximum power, it would create an electromagnetic pulse that would disable any vehicles within range. Cal finished. But it would also fry this facility and alert the entire Imperial presence on the planet to our location. Do we have a choice? Cal shook his head grimly. Help me with the override sequence. Together, they reprogrammed the massive dish, overriding safety protocols to direct its full broadcasting power toward the approaching vehicles. As the final sequence initiated, warning klaxons blared throughout the facility. We have 30 seconds before transmission, Mara warned. We need to shield the spheres and ourselves. They retreated to a maintenance closet lined with radiation-absorbing material, standard protection for technicians during high-power broadcasts. Clutching the precious artifacts between them, they huddled as the countdown reached 0. Even through the shielding, they felt the pulse as a pressure wave that popped their ears and made their teeth vibrate. The facility's lights flickered and died, emergency systems failing to engage. When they emerged, the control room was dark except for the faint glow of battery-powered emergency strips along the floor. Through the window, Mara could see the security vehicles had stopped, their systems completely disabled. "It worked," she breathed. "But we've just announced our presence to everyone within 100 kilometers. Look," Call pointed to the eastern horizon, where a small craft skimmed the desert surface at impossible speed. Unlike the bulky Imperial vehicles, this one was sleek, clearly modified for speed and stealth. "Jarek," Call confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. The craft approached recklessly fast, braking hard, only in the final seconds. It hovered 2 meters above the vitrified sand, its hull shimmering with heat dispersal technology that rendered it nearly invisible to thermal scanners. A hatch opened in its side, and a figure leapt out, tall and lean, with the characteristic azure skin of a Tralian, though heavily scarred on one side of his face. "Quickly!" Jarek called in accented standard. "Imperial reinforcements are already airborne." Mara helped Call toward the craft. As they approached, Jarek's eyes widened at the sight of the spherical devices. "Where did you find these?" he demanded, even as he helped them aboard. "Underground chamber," Call managed through pain. "Indigenous technology. We think they conceal the anomaly." Jarek's expression shifted from shock to grim determination. "Then we have no time to waste." Once they were secure, the craft accelerated with stomach-churning force. Through a view screen, Mara watched as Imperial interceptors appeared in the distance, too late to prevent their escape. "They'll track us," she warned. "Let them try." Jarek's scarred face twisted in a fierce grin. "This vessel has modifications the Empire hasn't even dreamed of." As if to demonstrate, he activated a sequence that enveloped the craft in a shimmering field. The sensation was disorienting, like being simultaneously in multiple locations. "Quantum position uncertainty field," he explained, noting Mara's confusion. "It doesn't make us invisible, but it makes our exact location impossible to pinpoint. We appear to be in several places at once." "Imperial technology doesn't have that capability," Mara said, impressed despite her exhaustion. "Imperial technology is impressive, but predictable." Jarek navigated through a narrow canyon, the craft responding to his commands with preternatural precision. They excel at brute force solutions, but lack creativity. As the immediate danger of pursuit faded, Mara turned her attention to Call, whose condition had deteriorated. His breathing was labored, and the exoskeletal fracture in his leg had widened, leaking a pale fluid. "He needs medical attention," she told Jarek. "The broken exoskeleton is compromising his internal system." "We're almost there." Jarek manipulated the controls, bringing the craft into a steep descent toward what appeared to be a solid cliff face. As they approached, a section of the rock shimmered and disappeared, a holographic projection concealing a hangar entrance. The craft slipped inside, settling onto a landing pad within a spacious cavern, outfitted with salvaged and modified equipment. "Welcome to what the Empire would call a terrorist cell," Jarek said with bitter humor. "We prefer Resistance Outpost." 2 other Tralians rushed forward as the hatch opened, carefully extracting Call from the craft. They spoke rapidly in their native language, their expressions growing grave as they examined his injuries. "Will he survive?" Mara asked Jarek as they followed the makeshift medical team deeper into the cavern complex. "Tralians are resilient, but exoskeletal injuries are serious. It would be simple to treat in a proper facility." His jaw tightened. "Here, with limited resources, we will do our best." While the others tended to Call, Jarek led Mara to what appeared to be a workshop. Tools and components from a dozen different technological traditions littered the space, alongside half-completed devices of uncertain purpose. "Now," he said, turning to her with intense focus, "show me these artifacts." Mara carefully unwrapped the three spherical devices. In the proper lighting of the workshop, their complexity became even more apparent. What had seemed like simple circuit patterns in the cavern revealed themselves as multi-layered designs that shifted subtly as the light moved across them. Jarek handled them with reverent care, placing each on a scanning platform. Holographic displays sprang to life, showing detailed cross-sections of the internal structures. "Remarkable," he breathed. "These predate Corinth by thousands of years, yet incorporate principles we're only beginning to understand. Quantum entanglement, consciousness mapping, dimensional anchoring." "Can you determine their purpose?" Mara asked. "I believe your theory is correct. They're designed to contain the entity you call the Planet Eater." Jarek manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific internal components. These structures could indeed redirect consciousness energy, the entity's food source. But Call said we'd need 7 to complete the containment circuit. We only have 3, and they're damaged. Jarek studied the scans more intensely. The damage is primarily to the outer casings. The core systems appear intact. As for the missing devices, he hesitated. There might be a way to compensate. "How?" Instead of answering directly, Jarek pulled up another holographic display, a map of the region surrounding the anomaly. The indigenous people positioned these devices at specific points that formed a heptagonal pattern around the entity. Each point corresponds to a particular dimensional frequency. "You're saying we could replicate the missing devices?" "Not exactly. We lack the materials and knowledge to create true duplicates." Jarek highlighted the 3 points where they could place their existing spheres. "But we might be able to construct simple resonators tuned to the same frequencies. They wouldn't have the full capabilities of the originals, but they might complete the circuit long enough to initiate containment." Hope flickered in Mara's chest. "How long would it take to build these resonators?" "With the right materials, perhaps 12 hours. Jarek's expression grew troubled. "But there's something else you should understand about these devices. The reason they can redirect consciousness energy is because they're designed to temporarily contain it themselves." "Meaning what?" "Meaning someone must activate each device manually, and in doing so, they risk having their own consciousness captured if the process fails." His gaze was solemn. "This technology doesn't just redirect energy. It uses living consciousness as a conduit." The implications struck Mara like a physical blow. "You're saying whoever activates these devices might be consumed just like the Planet Eater's victims?" "It's a possibility. The indigenous texts my people recovered from similar sites describe the process as soul binding. The activator links their consciousness to the device, becoming part of the containment matrix." Jarek's scarred face betrayed no emotion. "Some survived the process. Others did not." Mara sank into a nearby chair, the weight of this new information overwhelming her. They had a potential solution, but it carried a terrible price. "We need to try," she said finally, "even if the risk is high, if the entity breaks free completely." "I know." Jarek turned back to his workbench. "I'll begin constructing the resonators. You should rest while you can." But rest proved impossible. When Mara closed her eyes, she heard again the layered screams from the recording, thousands of consciousnesses trapped in eternal agony. And beneath those screams, something else, a vast, ancient hunger that had consumed worlds before Jar 7th and would consume countless more if left unchecked. Hours later, she found herself beside Kal's medical pod. The Trallian had been placed in a healing trance, his broken exoskeleton carefully braced and treated with regenerative compounds. His breathing was steadier, but the medical monitors showed his condition remained critical. He was brave to escape with you, Jarek said softly, appearing at her side. Braver still to insist on saving the artifacts, rather than himself. Will he recover? Mara asked. In time, yes. But not quickly enough to help us with the containment attempt. Jarek handed her a small data tablet. I've completed the resonator designs. We can begin construction as soon as I gather the necessary components. Mara reviewed the schematics. The resonators were relatively simple compared to the original spheres. Essentially, amplifiers designed to echo the frequency patterns of the ancient devices. But their power requirements were enormous. This will drain your entire facility's energy reserves, she noted. Yes, and likely attract Imperial attention due to the power signature. Jarek's expression was resolute. This is not without risk for my people. Why help us then? Why not flee while you can? Because some threats transcend political conflicts. Jarek nodded toward the hanging display where the anomaly's expansion was being tracked. The Planet Eater has grown 15% since you arrived. At this rate, it will consume the entire planet within weeks. No one will be safe. Corinth or Tralian. A sudden commotion from the main chamber interrupted them. One of the Tralian resistance fighters burst into the medical area, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. Jarek responded sharply, his expression darkening. What is it? Mara asked. Imperial forces have launched a major offensive against all suspected resistance outposts in the sector. They're using prototype quantum resonance scanners that can penetrate our concealment measures. Jarek moved quickly to a control panel, bringing up tactical displays. We have perhaps 3 hours before they locate us. Then we need to move now, Mara said. Begin the containment attempt before they arrive. The resonators aren't ready, and we haven't properly tested the original spheres. We don't have a choice. If the Empire captures the spheres, they'll destroy them to maintain their access to the entity. Mara stood straighter, decision crystallizing. I'll take what we have to the anomaly perimeter. You finish the resonators and follow when you can. Jarek studied her face, seeming to measure her resolve. You understand what you're volunteering for? If you attempt activation with incomplete resources? I know the risks. Mara thought of the thousands already consumed by the Planet Eater, and the millions more who would suffer if it continued to expand. This is my responsibility. I was part of the team that planned to exploit the entity. I need to make this right. After a long moment, Jarek nodded. Very well, but you won't go alone. I'll send our best pilot with you, and maintain communication as we complete the remaining resonators. Preparations moved with urgent efficiency. The 3 original spheres were carefully packed in shielded containers, along with the single completed resonator. Mara studied the activation sequences Jarek had deciphered from his analysis, committing them to memory. As she boarded the small transport craft with a young Tralian pilot, Jarek pressed a small device into her hand. What's this? She asked. Insurance, he replied grimly. If the containment fails and the entity begins to consume you, use it. It will end your consciousness cleanly, preventing the eternal suffering of its other victims. Mara stared at the small cylinder, a mercy kill device. She pocketed it without comment, the weight of it against her side, a cold comfort. The journey to the anomaly perimeter took less than 30 minutes at maximum speed. They approached from the far side, relative to the research outpost, hoping to avoid immediate detection by Imperial forces. As they neared, the pilot slowed, his face tightening with apprehension. It's grown, he said unnecessarily. The anomaly was visibly larger than when Mara had fled the outpost the previous day. The darkness at its center seemed more intense, and the occasional pulses of anti-light more frequent. The ground around its perimeter had begun to crack and sink, creating a gradual slope toward the abyss. They landed at the first designated point in the heptagonal pattern, approximately 2 kilometers from the anomaly's edge. According to the indigenous diagrams, Each device needed to be placed at specific coordinates to create the containment field. "I'll place this one," Mara told the pilot, carefully removing one of the original spheres from its container. "Then you'll take me to the next position." "Be careful," the pilot warned. "The ground is unstable." Mara approached the designated spot cautiously. As she drew closer to the anomaly, she felt a strange pressure in her mind. Not quite a sound or a sensation, but something between the two. It reminded her of the layered screams from the recording, but muted, as if heard underwater. When she reached the exact coordinates, she placed the sphere on the ground. Nothing happened immediately. According to Jarek's instructions, the activation sequence required all devices to be in position before initiation. They repeated the process at the second and third points, placing the remaining original spheres. At the fourth point, they installed the single completed resonator. Jarek's voice crackled over the communicator. "We're finishing the second resonator now. ETA 20 minutes to your position." "Understood," Mara replied. "But we have company." In the distance, Imperial shuttles had appeared, descending toward the research outpost. It wouldn't be long before they detected the unauthorized craft near the anomaly. "We'll be as quick as possible," Jarek promised. "Begin preliminary calibration on the placed devices." Mara returned to the first sphere, activating its external interface as Jarek had shown her. The surface shimmered in response, patterns shifting and realigning. She adjusted specific nodes, tuning the device to recognize the others in the network. As she worked on the third sphere, a tremor shook the ground, stronger than any previous ones. The edge of the anomaly surged outward, several meters in a single pulse, consuming a section of desert. The sudden expansion sent a shockwave across the landscape, knocking Mara to her knees. "It's accelerating," she gasped into her communicator. "We're running out of time." "Almost there," Jarek responded, his voice tight with tension. "2 more resonators complete. Beginning approach to your position." But it was too late. Imperial interceptors had spotted their craft and were moving to engage. The Tralian pilot shouted a warning as weapons fire strafed the ground nearby. "Go!" Mara ordered him. "Get airborne and rendezvous with Jarek. I'll continue on foot." The pilot hesitated only briefly before complying. As the craft lifted off, drawing the interceptors away, Mara grabbed her equipment and ran toward the 5th position. Without a resonator to place there, she could only mark the spot for Jarek's arrival. Another, stronger tremor knocked her off her feet. This time, the ground beneath her cracked, a fissure opening toward the anomaly. Dark energy pulsed along its length, reaching for her like tendrils of living shadow. Mara scrambled backwards, heart pounding. The entity was reacting to the presence of the containment devices, perhaps sensing the threat they posed. She had to complete the preliminary calibration before it could interfere further. Returning to the 4th position where the resonator was placed, she made the final adjustments to link it with the original spheres. As she worked, the pressure in her mind intensified. Images flashed behind her eyes, memories that weren't her own. Alien landscapes, strange civilizations, and always the terrifying moment of consumption as the planet eater devoured them. "It's trying to distract you," came an unexpected voice. Mara turned to find Kal limping toward her, his damaged leg heavily braced. "Kal, you shouldn't be here. Your injuries are less important than this." He gestured to the expanding anomaly. Jarek's shuttle was intercepted. He managed to drop the remaining resonators but was forced to retreat. "I came in a secondary craft." Mara's heart sank. "Without Jarek, I don't know if I can complete the calibration properly. The final sequence requires his expertise." "I can help," Kal pointed to his head. "Jarek transferred the necessary knowledge before I left. A Tralian technique, temporary memory sharing." Together, they collected the dropped resonators and placed them at the remaining positions. Each one required careful calibration to match the frequency patterns of the original spheres. As they worked, the anomaly continued to expand in irregular pulses, each one bringing the edge closer to their position. Imperial forces had engaged Jarek's craft in the distance, the firefight illuminating the darkening sky as Jar-7's twin suns began to set. It was only a matter of time before ground troops arrived to investigate the activity around the anomaly. "Final resonator in place," Call announced, making the last adjustments. "The network is ready for activation." Mara consulted the instructions Jarek had provided. "The activation must be simultaneous. We'll need to split up, 3 devices each, with precise timing." "I'll take the eastern points," Call said. "You take the western." They synchronized their chronometers and separated, each moving to their first assigned position. The plan was to activate each device in sequence, moving quickly between them to complete the circuit before the entity could react. Mara reached her first position, one of the original spheres. According to the instructions, activation required both physical contact and mental focus. She placed both hands on the device, feeling its surface warm beneath her touch. "Initiating in 3, 2, 1. She counted over the communicator. At the moment of activation, Mara felt a sharp pain behind her eyes as the sphere connected with her consciousness. Information flooded her mind, not in words or images, but in pure conceptual form. She understood suddenly how the device functioned, redirecting the consciousness energy the Planet Eater consumed into a closed loop. She staggered to her second position, disoriented but determined. Call's labored breathing came over the communicator as he, too, moved between his assigned points. The second activation was more difficult. The resonator at this position lacked the sophisticated interfaces of the original sphere, requiring more of Mara's own mental energy to establish the connection. She felt herself being drawn into the device, part of her awareness spreading thin across the forming containment network. By the third activation, the ground was shaking continuously. The anomaly's edge had advanced to within 500 meters of the nearest position, its darkness seeming to reach hungrily toward the devices that threatened to contain it. "Final position activated," Call gasped over the communicator. Mara completed her own final activation, moments later. The effect was immediate and terrifying. All 7 devices began to pulse with energy, lines of force visible in the air between them. The heptagonal pattern glowed with increasing intensity, creating a dome of energy over the anomaly. But something was wrong. The field flickered unstably, particularly at the points where the resonators had been placed. They lacked the capacity of the original spheres, straining to maintain the containment. "The field is failing," Mara shouted into her communicator. "The resonators can't handle the energy load." "I know," Call replied, his voice strangely calm. "There's only one solution." Before Mara could respond, she saw him moving, not away from the anomaly, but toward it. He limped deliberately to the center of the containment pattern, where the energy lines converged above the darkness. "Call, what are you doing?" she screamed. "What must be done?" His voice was eerily peaceful. "The field needs a consciousness anchor, a living mind to stabilize the pattern. The indigenous people knew this. That's why they created 7 devices for 7 volunteers." Horror dawned on Mara. "No, there must be another way." "There isn't." Call had reached the center point now, standing at the very edge of the anomaly. "My consciousness has already been touched by the entity during the experiments. There's a resonance. I can serve as the final component." "Call, please. Tell Jarek I am honored to have known him." Call's voice broke slightly. "And thank you, Mara Kalin, for showing me that not all humans are like Corinth." Before she could respond, Call stepped forward into the convergence point of the energy field, his body illuminated from within, becoming a living conduit for the containment energies. The unstable flickering of the field steadied, the dome of force solidifying around the anomaly. The Planet Eater reacted violently. The darkness at the center of the anomaly boiled upward, tendrils of anti-light striking against the containment field. Each impact sent visible shockwaves through Call's illuminated form. But the field held. Mara ran toward him, stopping short at the edge of the energy pattern. Up close, she could see that Call wasn't simply standing in the energy field. He was becoming part of it. His physical form was dissolving, consciousness spreading throughout the containment network. "Call!" she called desperately. His face turned toward her, features already blurring into light. "I hear them," he said, voice resonating strangely. "All the victims. Their suffering is immense." "Can we help them?" Mara asked, tears streaming down her face. "Perhaps. The containment isn't permanent, just a seal that must be maintained. But in time, they might be freed." His form destabilized further, only a vague humanoid shape of light remaining. "You must go. Imperial forces approach, and the field will release a massive energy pulse when it completes formation." "I won't leave you." "You must." The light that had been Call pulsed gently. "Someone needs to tell the truth about this place, about what dwells here, about what Corinth intended." In the distance, Imperial ground vehicles had appeared, racing toward the containment site. Mara had minutes at most before they arrived. "Go," Call's voice urged, now seeming to come from everywhere within the containment field. "Live. Remember." With a final, agonizing look at the fading light that had been her friend, Mara turned and ran toward the secondary craft Call had arrived in. Behind her, the containment field began its final phase, energy building toward a culminating pulse. She reached the craft and launched just as Imperial troops arrived at the perimeter. The containment field released its stabilizing pulse, a wave of energy that disabled the Imperial vehicles and briefly interfered with her own craft's systems. When the controls responded again, she set course away from Jar 7, climbing rapidly through the atmosphere. From orbit, she looked back at the planet's surface. The anomaly was now visible as a perfect heptagon of light in the desert landscape. The Planet Eater, temporarily contained by ancient technology, and a final, noble sacrifice. Mara set coordinates for the nearest neutral space station. The Empire would hunt her now, branded a traitor and saboteur. But she carried something they couldn't take, the truth about what dwelled in the darkness between worlds, and what it meant for all sentient life. As her craft entered hyperspace, Mara heard, or perhaps felt, a final whisper from the consciousness that had been Call. "They still scream, but now, there is hope." 6 months later, Mara Kalin stood before the Alliance Council on Earth, her testimony about Jar 7 finally being heard by those with the power to act. The Corinth Empire had denounced her as a terrorist and demanded her extradition, but evidence she had smuggled from the research outpost had forced even their allies to question their intentions. "The entity remains contained for now," she concluded. "But the seal is temporary. Without proper maintenance and additional containment technology, it will eventually break free. And there are others like it throughout the galaxy, hungry voids that consume not just matter, but consciousness itself." The council chambers fell silent. Representatives from 100 worlds contemplated the implications of her words. It was the Tralian ambassador who finally spoke. "What would you have us do, Dr. Kalin? We lack the technology to destroy these entities." "Not destroy," Mara corrected. "Contain." The indigenous people of Jar 7 developed a method that worked for centuries before Corinth eliminated them. With Jarek's help, I've begun recreating their research. She activated a holographic display, showing schematics for improved containment devices, designs that combine the ancient technology with modern engineering. "But more importantly," she continued, "we need to acknowledge what these entities represent. A fundamental crisis of consciousness in our universe. The Planet Eaters aren't just predators. They're wounds in reality that trap sentient beings in eternal suffering. And the Trallian who sacrificed himself? Asked another representative. Is he truly lost? Mara's throat tightened. Call's consciousness exists within the containment field, helping to maintain it. Whether he can ever be recovered. She shook her head. I don't know, but I believe it's possible. His sacrifice gives us time to find a solution, not just for him, but for all the victims. As the council debated next steps, Mara stepped away from the podium. Her work was far from complete. Somewhere in the vastness of space, Jarek continued his own research, communicating with her through encrypted channels. Together, they sought a more permanent solution to the Planet Eaters. But in her quietest moments, Mara still heard echoes of the voices trapped within the anomaly. Sometimes, she thought she could distinguish Call's voice among them, not screaming like the others, but singing a song of defiance against the darkness. She had returned to Earth carrying a terrible knowledge, that consciousness could be preserved in eternal agony, that entities existed which fed on suffering itself. But she also carried hope, that with understanding came the possibility of salvation, not just for future victims, but perhaps even for those already consumed. The darkness between worlds hungered still. But now, for the first time in millennia, the light had begun to fight back.